Have you ever been so close to achieving something you've worked hard for? A promotion, a degree, a personal milestone, that you could almost taste the victory. And then, strangely, your motivation faded? You find yourself procrastinating, dragging your feet, or suddenly becoming fascinated by other projects. It's confusing, even a little embarrassing. You think, I've done the hard part, why am I losing steam now? If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Losing interest when the finish line is in sight is far more common than we think, and it's not because you're lazy or undisciplined. In fact, there are fascinating psychological and even evolutionary reasons behind it, and understanding them can help you reclaim your momentum, not just in this goal, but in every future goal you set. Let's unpack this together. To start, it helps to understand that our motivation is not a constant force. It ebbs and flows, and it's heavily influenced by how our brain perceives the journey versus the reward. When you first begin a goal, there's novelty, excitement, and the promise of transformation. The brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter that fuels anticipation and drive. You imagine the better version of yourself, and that image pulls you forward like a magnet. But as you get closer to the goal, something changes. Your brain starts shifting from anticipation to evaluation. It begins running a mental cost-benefit analysis. How much energy is left to invest versus how much the reward is really worth. If the perceived benefit has shrunk because the fantasy has become familiar or the novelty has worn off, your dopamine levels drop, and with it, your motivation. This is one reason you can feel less excited near the end than you did at the start. Another factor is what psychologists call the arrival fallacy. This is the mistaken belief that reaching a goal will bring lasting happiness or fulfillment. Throughout the journey, you've been projecting into the future, thinking, when I get there, I'll feel amazing. But as the end approaches, your subconscious starts to sense the truth. Life will go on and your problems won't magically vanish. This realization can create a quiet but powerful emotional deflation. It's like spending months preparing for a holiday, only to remember that you'll still have to come back to everyday life afterward. There's also the phenomenon of identity transition. Goals aren't just tasks, they're part of how we define ourselves. If you've been someone who is working toward X for a long time, then reaching X means losing that familiar identity. And even positive change can feel unsettling when it forces us to redefine ourselves. Part of you may unconsciously resist crossing the finish line because it feels like stepping into unknown territory. Beyond psychology, there's a practical issue at play. The closer you get to the end, the more detailed and specific the remaining steps often become. Early stages can be big, exciting leaps, brainstorming ideas, making visible progress. Later stages are often smaller, more tedious refinements. This shift from creative expansion to careful completion can feel less stimulating, even though it's equally important. So, if this is why we lose interest, what can we do about it? Let's look at some tools to keep your momentum alive when you're nearing the end. The first tool is reframe the finish line. Instead of seeing your goal as the end of the journey, view it as a checkpoint. This is especially useful for avoiding the arrival fallacy. For example, if you're about to finish writing a book, don't think, once it's done, that's it. Think, once it's done, I'll enter the next phase, sharing it, promoting it, and learning from readers. This keeps your mind anchored to an ongoing process rather than a cliff edge where all the meaning drops off. The second tool is celebrate micro wins. When you're close to the end, it's easy to ignore progress because you're fixated on the final step. But consciously acknowledging the smaller victories can keep dopamine flowing. Think of it like adding fuel stations near the end of a race. These celebrations don't have to be big, just moments where you pause, recognize your effort, and let yourself feel proud. The third tool is refresh your vision. Remember how exciting the goal felt at the start? That excitement came from vivid mental imagery. Near the end, we tend to focus narrowly on tasks, losing sight of the bigger picture. Take time to reimagine what this goal means to you now, not just what it meant months ago. Ask yourself, how will my life be different once I cross this finish line? Who else might benefit? How will this shape my future? This mental refresh can reignite emotional investment. A fourth tool is connect the dots to your identity. If part of your hesitation comes from losing your in-progress identity, then create a bridge to the next identity. For example, if you're completing your degree, you can start thinking of yourself not just as a student finishing up, but as an emerging professional in my field. This turns the finish line into a doorway rather than a wall. The fifth tool is to introduce a parallel challenge. If your main goal feels like it's losing energy, sometimes bringing in a smaller related goal can re-energize you. For instance, if you're close to launching a product and the final tweaks feel dull, set yourself a creative side challenge, like designing a bold launch announcement. This taps into the novelty-driven part of your brain without derailing your main objective. Finally, there's the mindset shift of seeing endings as beginnings. In many philosophical traditions, completion isn't about closure, it's about transformation. The Stoics, for example, saw life as a series of cycles, where each ending naturally feeds into a new phase. When you view your goal as part of a bigger cyclical pattern, it's harder for motivation to collapse at the end. It's worth noting that sometimes losing interest near the end is a signal worth listening to. It might be your mind's way of telling you that the goal no longer aligns with your values or priorities. In these cases, pushing to finish just for the sake of finishing may not be the wisest choice. The trick is to differentiate between a temporary motivation dip and a deeper misalignment. One way to do this is through a quick reflection exercise. Ask yourself, if I magically woke up tomorrow and this goal was done, would I feel relieved and proud, or would I feel indifferent? Your answer will tell you whether it's worth pushing through or pivoting. Let's go deeper into the neuroscience for a moment, because understanding what's happening in your brain can make this all click. Dopamine, the so-called motivation molecule, isn't just about pleasure, it's about pursuit. It spikes when we anticipate a reward, not necessarily when we receive it. This means the closer you get to the reward, the less your brain releases dopamine, unless you find ways to keep the pursuit alive. That's why strategies like reframing the finish line or setting parallel challenges work. They give your brain a reason to keep chasing. Interestingly, research also shows that our perception of effort changes near the end. It's called the goal gradient effect. In studies with animals and humans, performance increases when the goal feels close, but only if the reward still feels valuable. If the reward feels smaller than expected, performance can drop sharply. This is why managing your perception of the reward is so critical. If you can remind yourself why the goal matters and update that meaning as you grow, you can keep the reward's value high in your mind. All of this points to a key truth. Motivation is not just about pushing harder, it's about managing meaning. When you lose interest near the end, it's often because the meaning you assigned to the goal has shifted without you noticing. The solution is to realign the goal with your current self, not your past self. That's the heart of staying motivated through the final stretch. So, how do you realign a goal with your current self when you're already so close to finishing? The first step is to revisit your why in the present tense. When you first started, you might have been motivated by curiosity, external validation, or even the desire to prove something to yourself. But as you've grown along the way, your reasons may have shifted. Ask yourself, why does this matter to me right now? Not last month, not last year, today. Write down your answer. This exercise forces your brain to reconnect the goal to your current values, which refreshes its perceived importance. The second step is to consciously create what I call a post-goal bridge. Our brains often resist finishing because they associate endings with loss of purpose, structure, or identity. By designing a clear next step, you signal to your brain that finishing won't mean falling into a void. For example, if your goal is to run a half marathon, plan your next physical challenge before race day, maybe a hiking trip or a personal best attempt for a shorter distance. Your mind then sees the current finish line as a launch pad. The third step is to adjust your reward system so that progress itself feels rewarding, not just the final result. A powerful method here is milestone stacking. Instead of holding all your emotional payoff for the very end, create layered celebrations for the 90%, 95%, and 99% marks. These don't need to be extravagant. They could be as simple as sharing your progress with a friend or taking an intentional pause to appreciate how far you've come. This helps your brain maintain motivation through consistent dopamine reinforcement. Another technique is to gamify the final stretch. Many people unconsciously make the last phase feel like a grind by treating it as just work left to be done. But what if you turned it into a challenge with clear, enjoyable rules? You could set a timer and see how much you can complete in focused sprints, or create a visual tracker where you cross off microtasks. Gamification adds a layer of playfulness that counteracts the fatigue of repetition. There's also immense value in changing your environment during the final push. Novel surroundings can reset your perspective and re-energize your focus. If you've been working on your project at the same desk for months, Try finishing the last steps in a new space, a library, a cafe, or even a different room at home. The physical change can make the last phase feel distinct and fresh, rather than a blurred continuation of the middle. Now, let's talk about the emotional side. Sometimes, nearing the end triggers subconscious fears of judgment. If completing a goal means sharing it with others or putting it into the world, part of you might delay to avoid criticism. This is what psychologists refer to as self-handicapping. If you never finish, you can always tell yourself it could have been great. Recognizing this fear is the first step. The antidote is gradual exposure. Share small parts of your work or progress before it's finished, so the leap from private to public feels less overwhelming. Another emotional barrier is what I call the nostalgia trap. Oddly enough, we can miss the process before it's even over. If a project has been part of your life for a long time, it becomes familiar and comforting, even when it's challenging. Finishing means saying goodbye to that version of your daily routine. To counter this, focus on carrying forward the best parts of the process, whether it's the habits you developed, the people you connected with, or the creative flow you experienced, into your next chapter. Let's also address energy management, because many motivation dips near the end are simply about being mentally and physically drained. Big goals often require sustained effort over time, and by the time you're 90% there, your reserves are low. This is where strategic rest becomes essential. Instead of pushing harder in frustration, take short intentional breaks that recharge you without derailing momentum. This could be as simple as a day off from the project to do something purely enjoyable and unrelated. That reset can give you the final push you need. If you want to go even deeper, you can apply a philosophical lens to this problem. In Zen Buddhism, there's the concept of shoshin, or beginner's mind, approaching each moment with openness and curiosity, as if seeing it for the first time. Applying this to the end of a goal means treating the final steps not as the tail end of a long journey, but as a fresh experience in themselves. When you infuse the end with the same curiosity you had at the start, you revive the emotional energy that carried you in the beginning. Another perspective comes from existential philosophy, the idea that meaning is not found in outcomes, but in the ongoing act of creation and engagement. When you accept that the end is just another moment in the flow of life, you stop clinging to it as a defining point. This frees you from the pressure that often causes interest to drop and allows you to see completion as simply part of your continuous story. By now, you can probably see that losing interest near the end isn't a personal flaw. It's a natural result of how our brains and emotions are wired. The key is to work with that wiring instead of against it. By reconnecting your goal to your present identity, designing a post-goal bridge, celebrating micro wins, gamifying the final stretch, changing your environment, addressing fears of judgment, honoring the process, and managing your energy, you can keep your momentum alive until and beyond the finish line. And remember, each goal you complete teaches your brain a pattern. I finish what I start. This pattern compounds over time, building trust in yourself and reducing the likelihood of future drop-offs. So the next time you feel your motivation slipping just as you're about to finish, you'll have the tools to recognize it, understand it, and turn it around. Because ultimately, this isn't just about crossing one finish line. It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't stop when things get close, but instead finishes strong and moves forward with purpose. If this insight resonated with you and you want to keep building your personal toolkit for better thinking, then take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might be stuck in their own final stretch, and subscribe to Mind Unlocked. Together, we'll keep exploring the ideas and tools that not only help you understand your mind, but also unlock its full potential for the life you want to live.